It'll be interesting. This is a defense, when you look at it, in some ways, it's an embarrassment of riches. When you look at their defensive front, I think a player that doesn't get talked about much at all, but when you look at his tape for what he's asked to do in the context of that defense, Travis Jones is a big-time interior defensive tackle.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It never is. I give you guys everything I got, 25 plus minutes a day, every day during the NFL regular season and postseason, 3 times a week here in the off-season, quote-unquote off-season. Today is a Greg Cosell Teaching Tutorial Thursday, which is awesome. We are presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. We are continuing our divisional preview series, I should say, which is extremely helpful for me because it is awesome to get Greg's insight into what he's thinking with every single team. Kind of gets me ready for training camp and then me ready for when I'm calling games for CBS again this year and Westwood One, which will be fantastic. Can't tell you how much I love those of you that rate and review the show, or especially subscribe, whether it's on audio podcast or youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Subscribe and make sure you share. Make sure you have those notifications turned on too, so you know exactly when Greg drops or the latest Even Money betting episode or whatever it is that you're into. Love those of you who take advantage of the sponsors as well. Perfect day to be talking AFC North because there's news with both the Ravens and the Browns. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, Greg, we already did the NFC and AFC East. Now we're getting into the AFC North today. I think we'll probably do the NFC North next week, but it's perfect timing for the AFC North because before we even get into the Baltimore Ravens, they made a notable signing, at least in terms of name recognition, by signing Jair Alexander, who the Packers released before minicamp a week prior yesterday. I feel like this is one of those, Greg, where you say, at his best, Jair Alexander is, because he's missed a lot of games. He hasn't been at his best a lot in recent years.
No, and that's the issue. Over the last 4 years, I believe, Ross, if I'm not mistaken, he's missed a lot of games. But let's assume health. And this takes us in some ways right into the Ravens anyway, which, we can discuss with the AFC North. So here's the question I have. Obviously, he's a very good corner when he's at his best. Probably in that top 10, maybe top 5 or 6 category. Last year, the rookie Nate Wiggins only played in the sub defenses, and he was a first-round pick. So the question is, with Jair Alexander, who plays in their base defense on the outside? Because they still have Marlon Humphrey. And Marlon Humphrey had a very good season a year ago. So when they're in their base defense, are the outside corners Alexander and Humphrey? Or is Humphrey, in a sense, relegated to nickel? And they play Wiggins as a starter who now plays every snap? As I said, he was a first-round pick. So they'll figure all that out. And they obviously had an idea before they even signed Alexander, or they wouldn't have signed him. Teams have plans. But to me, that's going to be very, very interesting to see how that plays out on the back end.
So what's fascinating to me about what you just said, Greg, is to compare that to last week when we were looking at the secondary for the Miami Dolphins, it's like night and day.
Oh, my God.
I mean, the Dolphins don't really have a proven commodity. Maybe you could say Kohu as a nickelback, but they don't really have a guy. Whereas the Ravens, now at safety of Kyle Hamilton and a first-round pick, Malachi Starks. Obviously, Ardarius Washington got hurt. But then obviously you said it, Nate Wiggins. Now, by the way, they also have Chidobe Awuzie.
I know, I was just going to say that, who, again, Tennessee cut. but he's played a lot of snaps as a starter in the league, and they chose to sign him, obviously, before Alexander. So it'll be interesting. This is a defense, when you look at it, in some ways, it's an embarrassment of riches. You know, uh, when you look at their defensive front, I think a player that doesn't get talked about much at all, but when you look at his tape for what he's asked to do in the context of that defense, Travis Jones is a big-time interior defensive tackle, and he's not talked about when people talk about those top D tackles in the league because he's not a pass rusher, but he's a really, really good football player.
It's so funny. As you were saying that, I knew you were going to say Travis Jones. I knew it. I did several of his games when he was at UConn.
He was great.
That guy was double teamed every single play and was still a monster. He is exactly the way you draw it up. What about Greg for the Ravens before I get to the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah.
Alexander, he's always struck me, and I haven't studied him like you have. Is it fair to call him, guesser is not the right word, but I get like an Asante Samuel vibe with him where he is instinctive. He's going to take some chances. Does it hurt him at times? I mean, he just feels like a guy that he's looking for that pick six. Is he more of a zone guy, more of a man guy? Just break him down.
Yeah, I think he can play both, but you're right. Guesser's not the right word. I think the two better words that fit that style when you're playing off coverage is keyer and a cluer. He's very good at understanding route concepts and then reading the quarterback as well. The term that's often used is reading the triangle, where you can read the receiver through to the quarterback, and he's very good at jumping routes. But he's also feisty and competitive, as you know. He's a talker out there, and he will play press man. So he can line up and play really any coverage that you choose to play.
You can't often say this, Greg, but the guy is a two-time MVP, and I think it's fair to say last year might have been Lamar Jackson's best year. And he didn't win the MVP, even though he's won it a couple times. Now they bring in DeAndre Hopkins.
Yep.
They re-sign Rashad Bateman. Obviously, Zay Flowers is still there. They have fortified the O-line even a little bit more. Derrick Henry got the contract extension as well. What, if anything, do you see from this offense? I mean, I guess Todd Monk is just going to keep doing what he did last year.
Well, in the context of this offense, okay, you can no longer say that, just let Lamar Jackson play from the pocket and he'll beat you. And you can beat him. He'll beat you from the pocket now in the context of this offense, because you have to understand a couple of things. Number one, it's an incredibly difficult offense to scheme against defensively. I'm sure not a lot of people think of it in those terms. They just look at Lamar. But to try to scheme against this offense with the Lamar element in the run game, the Derrick Henry, Derrick Henry, has there ever been a player who gained 1,900 yards who was overlooked a year ago because of what Saquon Barkley did? No one talked about Derrick Henry. He gained over 1,900 yards at his age, which is truly remarkable. They have two really outstanding tight ends in Andrews and Likely. Likely's not talked about enough either. And the O-line is very good. You watch their tape, and there's players. People know Ronnie Stanley. He's been in the league since 2016 when healthy. One of the better left tackles in the league. But the right side of that O-line, Rosengarten is a really solid player. And he was a rookie a year ago. But the guy that I thought really was, and I'm not an offensive line guru, Ross, you know that. But I thought the guy who really kind of stood out when you watch their tape is Filele. He is a huge man. He played tackle at Minnesota, and now he's a guard in the league. He's a really good player. This is a really good O-line. And in the context of this offense, Lamar can sit back there. He can see the field. He's a very instinctive player, Lamar Jackson. He's kind of a see-it guy, but he sees it really well. And you just can't say, let him sit in the pocket and throw it. In the context of this offense, he's very, very good at it.
The only real question mark on the O-line would be left guard.
Yeah.
Sounds like Andrew Voorhees and Ben Cleveland are competing for that spot. Let's move on, Greg, to the Cincinnati Bengals. Burrow had a fantastic year, but they did not make the postseason. We know, and not really for you to talk about. I talk about the contract issues they have with Shamar Stewart, Trey Hendrickson. But
Right.
from an X's and O's standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, what kind of jumps out to you about the Cincinnati Bengals, Greg?
Well, there's not a ton to say about their offense because it's terrific. We all know about Burrow and the receivers. So I think the player who really was overlooked to a large extent because of Burrow and the receivers was the year Chase Brown had. He's become a really, really important part of this offense. Now, obviously, their O-line needed some work on the inside. They've got new players now. They drafted Dylan Fairchild in the third round out of Georgia because, quite frankly, Cornell Volson, when you watch his tape over the last couple of years, he really struggles in pass pro. I was up and down on Fairchild's tape, so, again, they liked him. They'd love for him to be the starter at left guard. So that's the issue, which has been for years. Defensively, we know is the big issue. That's I don't know the exact number, Ross, but I think there were 4 or 5 games last year where they scored over 30 points and they lost. And, obviously that can't happen. We'll see what happens with Shamar Stewart. Normally that stuff gets worked out. I did read that they've restarted negotiations with Hendrickson. Let's assume all that stuff gets worked out. They clearly made some changes, beginning with the new coordinator, Al Golden. They drafted one of my favorite linebackers in the draft in the second round, Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. It would not surprise me if he's the starter next to Logan Wilson from day one. He's an older player. To me, he fits right in. The big issue for me is they have an extremely young secondary, and I think that needs to be kind of worked out as they go through training camp. They probably have a sense through minicamp. I think Dax Hill coming back is a big deal because he was clearly their best corner. They had moved him from safety last year to corner, and he was their best corner before he got hurt. So the secondary kind of needs to be worked out because you know and I know that you can't really play good defense in this league with an average to below average secondary.
No, and again, I'm not going to compare every team to the Ravens, Greg, but it's just notable to even look at the Bengals secondary compared to the Ravens secondary, right?
Yeah,
I mean
they have all these young guys. And look,
Geno Stone starting at safety in Baltimore, they had guys they thought were better than him.
Right. And I think at some point every team has to play their draft picks, Ross. I mean, that's why you draft them, particularly if they're second or third round picks. Those are not throwaway picks. At some point you got to play them. And that's the point they're at. So now with the change in scheme, we'll see, who emerges as the starters and how it plays out.
Let's get to the Cleveland Browns, Greg, because they are really an interesting team as well. There's a lot of talk out there about getting back to who they are, getting back to Kevin Stefanski's offense, getting back to, their running game, which is interesting because it feels like they made a concerted effort last year in particular, but really the last 2 years, to try to do what Deshaun Watson did best, to try to basically do Deshaun Watson's offense so that he could be successful. And it still didn't work, Greg.
No, and again, this is just my point of view, okay? So again, some could disagree. I think that when all's said and done, the way Deshaun Watson plays, even if he's playing well, he did not play well in Cleveland, but even if he's playing well, that his style of play, the manner in which he plays well, is not really the way Kevin Stefanski sees the game offensively. I think you'd probably agree with that. I think what Stefanski would ultimately like to do is have the quarterback, I'm talking about normal down and distance, where you're proactive and you can play the way you want to play. I'm not talking about 3rd and 9. I think what he'd ultimately like to do is have the quarterback under center more, have the run game be the primary foundation, and have the pass game be a play-action pass game. Almost think back to like the Houston Texans a number of years ago when they had Matt Schaub. That kind of offense. And again, I don't know who's going to emerge as the starter, but I would think that Joe Flacco fits that best because he's done that through almost his entire career. And they drafted Quinshon Judkins in the second round and Dylan Sampson in the fourth round. And my sense is they see those two guys as their backs. Judkins clearly has feature back traits, and Sampson is a complementary back. Those are his traits. So my sense is that's what they would love to get back to, and they can line up with two tight ends. They still have Njoku. They drafted Fannin in the third round. I mean, I think that's in an ideal world what Stefanski would like to get back to. And by the way, they still have a good O-line. They've got two really good guards in Petonio and Teller. The question will be at left tackle because they want Juwan Jones to be the left tackle. He certainly has the traits to do it. So we'll see. But I think that's what they'd like to be on offense.
I think we talked about this when we were going through some of the skill guys. I think your point about Deshaun Watson's fantastic. It's like the first year they tried to put Deshaun Watson in Stefanski's offense, and it didn't really work. So then they switched and said, okay, Deshaun, we'll do your offense. Still didn't really work. I mean, they really give him credit. They tried everything. The only thing that's curious to me about that is taking Dylan Gabriel in the third round. He doesn't really strike me, and maybe he just hasn't done it. Maybe he could do it, but I just think gun, ball out quick when I think Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah.
I do think what Stefanski likes is a good fit for Flacco, for Kenny Pickett, and really could be for Shedeur Sanders too.
Yeah, although I can tell you for a fact they love Dylan Gabriel and they did see him in their offense. Now, again, that's they're projecting that to some extent because he didn't play that way in college. I'm sure when they worked him out, they went through all that and they probably felt very comfortable with it because I know they really did like him. We'll see how it all plays out. But, obvious to me, and I could be wrong, but I think the starter will either be Flacco or Pickett to start the season. And they'll go from there. But I think offensively, they'll be different. They'll get the quarterback under center, and they'll look to run the football.
Still have some high-level defensive players.
Yeah.
Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. It's a shame about Owusu-Koramoah. They need Schlesinger to step up right away. And they got Mason Graham, a top 5 pick at D-tackle.
Yeah, and I think they knew about Owusu-Koramoah, which is why they took Schlesinger. It's a really good defense. Jim Schwartz is still there. It's a very good secondary. They got really solid corner play. They have Delpit's a really good safety. I think the player who I thought emerged last year because he played a lot of snaps was Ronnie Hickman, who was a Ohio State player who I actually really liked his college tape and was kind of surprised. I don't think he was drafted, which kind of surprised me. But, and then they've got some young players, obviously, on that D-line. Graham is just a high-energy player. He's explosive, but he's not a great pass rusher. But he's a really dynamic, explosive, competitive player. I'm very anxious to see the development of Isaiah McGuire, a fourth-round pick in 2023 out of Missouri, a player whose tape I liked. He's not sudden or twitchy, but to me, he's a really solid player. And then Mike Hall was a second-round pick from Ohio State last year. Healthy, that kid, to me, can be a really dynamic interior pass rusher. That's what he does best.
Greg, let's get to the Steelers. We don't need to speculate anymore. I don't know if we talked about this yet, but Aaron Rodgers, officially the Steelers quarterback. How do you think he fits Arthur Smith's offense?
I mean, I think Rodgers fits any offense. He still throws the ball really well. The only issue with Rodgers now is he doesn't move as well. And that is an issue, and that shows up on tape. But as far as throwing the ball, there's no problem there. I think they'll try to make this a heavy run offense. There'll be boot action that he can certainly do. When I say he doesn't move as well, I'm talking about second reaction movement with Rodgers. I think they let Najee Harris go, and they drafted Caleb Johnson. Not a player I loved on tape, but that's irrelevant. They drafted him, and I think they want to have a run game with Johnson and Jaylen Warren. And Johnson, ideally, because of his size, would be more of a feature guy, assuming it works out. But we know that they addressed the O-line the year prior. So, when they obviously went and got DK Metcalf, I know they also signed Robert Woods. So, I think, Rodgers, to me, there's no question. I mean, I think you can overanalyze Rodgers. He still can throw it really well, and he's just not as mobile as he once was. But other than that, I don't know if there's, we're not there. The personality stuff, I can't speak to that. I don't know Aaron Rodgers, so I can't speak to any of that stuff. But as far as throwing the ball, I think he works fine in the context of Arthur Smith's offense.
Different quarterbacks adjust better as they get older to losing that mobility. I've noticed that over the years. There's some where they really struggle when they lose that.
Yeah.
What about the Steelers defensively, Greg? Again, still a lot of high-level players, and they brought in some guys like Darius Slay and Juan Thornhill.
Yeah, I mean, I assume Slay because they didn't really have a corner opposite Joey Porter that they liked. I assume Slay. Although he's not the player he once was. He's still pretty good, and he had a great postseason, which is what people remember. But throughout the course of last season, he wasn't quite the same player. But he'll probably be the starter opposite Porter, who's a good corner. Minkah Fitzpatrick is the term I use, which I got from a coach, is a 5-tool safety. He can do everything. And a player they just re-signed, and every coach I've ever talked to talks about this player as just being sort of a key component of every defense that he's been in, and that's Deshaun Elliott. And they re-signed him, and he'll be this starter along with Fitzpatrick at safety. They're still, look, they still have good people up front, and they drafted Derek Harmon in the first round, who I think is an ascending type player. So defensively, you look at their roster, it's pretty solid.
Check him out on social media at Greg Cosell. He's the man. Next week, we keep it rolling. I think probably the NFC North, as after that, we'll be halfway through the divisional preview, getting you guys ready for NFL training camps in late July. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Ross.
All right, let's dive into the news. But first, the weekend will be here before you know it, which is Smirnoff time. Listen, they do game days even in the off season. Anytime you're going to have fun on the weekend, as far as I'm concerned, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, that is a game day. There's no I in fandom, all right? Rally together with your friends and family. It's the perfect vodka for crafting delicious cocktails. In fact, you can grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer and head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. They had like 5 or 6 on there I never heard of. I'll tell you about them next week. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, something that you talked about, Greg, earlier. Former Packers corner Jair Alexander, he signs with Baltimore for $4 million. That includes $2 million in incentives.
2 things jump out here. Number one, the Packers were clearly very right that Alexander was not worth the whatever it is, $17.5 million he was supposed to get from the Packers this year with all the games he had missed in recent years. I would love to know, and maybe it'll come out soon, how much of a pay cut they asked him to take. I doubt it was to $6 million or a $4 million base, which is what Alexander is doing. I'm quite confident that Alexander is taking less money to play for the Baltimore Ravens than he would have from the Packers, probably in part because he wants to play with Lamar Jackson, his college teammate, again in Baltimore, which is the second part of it, which is that a quarterback like Lamar Jackson provides a lot of value if you can get guys to take less because they want to play with him.
Browns rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders, he got a ticket for going 101 miles an hour in a 60-mile-per-hour zone.
And I think, Jack, I'm going to make this my Labatt Take of the Week, brought to you by Labatt. With Labatt, you can buy beer and get gear. Go to their website, snap a photo of your receipt, upload it to gain points towards exclusive merch. Any size, any product, anywhere you're buying Labatt. Sign up at rewards.labattusa.com. I do not think this is a big deal. I'm not leading my show with this like I'm sure some other shows are. But when you combine this with everything we heard during the pre-draft process, whether it was unprepared, immature, entitled, any of the terms that came out, it's not good. I mean, when you combine a bunch of little things that aren't good together, it's bad, especially at that position. And there's going to be people that say it's not that big a deal, and they're going to reply to this video and bring up Roethlisberger or Michael Vick or whatever. The point is at best, this is a really immature decision. At worst, it's a reflection on his decision making. And listen, I mean, people said, oh, he got drafted in the 5th round. It'll be a wake-up call. Well, it evidently wasn't that much of a wake-up call if he's still doing stuff like this.
The Jets, they cut Anders Carlson and signed Harrison Beavis, a.k.a. the Thicker Kicker.
I like that. I like nicknames like that. Thicker Kicker. I'm into that. Now I'm rooting for that guy. I hope he wins the job. I hope he's awesome. We need more thickness in general in life, but in particular in pro sports.
And the Falcons, they cut their 2024 6th-round pick, Jace McClellan, to sign Deshaun Corbin from the UFL.
So that's pretty quick to cut a 6th-round pick to not even take him to training camp the second year. That's not really a great look. They must have really not liked him. But there were a bunch of UFL guys. Damon Arnett, the Texans signed. A bunch of UFL guys getting signed this week, which I like. I like that it proves that that's a way back to the NFL, or at least to get an NFL opportunity for those guys. Other than that, have a fantastic weekend. Make sure you're checking out my social at Ross Tucker NFL. Throwing out the first pitch at the Reading Fightin' Phils tonight. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. I say it all the time. How about getting a loved one the best gift you've ever gotten them and guaranteeing that you get something signed from me? Myfrontpagestory.com. Just make sure you forward it to me, Ross at RossTucker.com. Backofficescheduler.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.